Good afternoon, folks. My name is Craig Kalki, team leader of the Lake Ontario Fruit Program, Cornell Cooperative Extension. We welcome you to our 10 to 13 millimeter thinning recommendations for Western New York. I know a lot of folks, you've done Zoom before. This is a Zoom meeting. With that, I am going to turn the program over to Dr. Terence Robinson.
I hope that it's gone well for you so far with blossom thinning and then petal fall thinning last week. I know that along the lake, right next to the lake, there are still some people that maybe are putting on petal fall sprays. But for today's meeting, I want to focus on this main thinning spray, which I call the 10 to 13 millimeter spray. Many years of comparing responses of thinners at different timings have shown that this is the moment between 10 and 13 millimeters when thinners are most potent and can cause the greatest thinning. We rely on this window, it's relatively short, to accomplish the vast majority of the thinning that we need every year. It's always a stressful time to decide how much and hopefully not over thin. But we do have two tools to help us in this context for the last several years. The first is the carbon balance model, which we'll go over the results of that in just a minute, which help us avoid overthinning situations. But also the fruit growth rate model, which we measure fruitlet diameters twice after a particular spray and calculate how many are growing fast enough to stay on the tree. We have just right now a little bit of data from people who measured fruit growth rates after their petal fall spray. And I hope it'll serve as a guide as we talk about what to do with this spray at 10 to 13 millimeters. I hope that this spray will be very successful and no more sprays will be needed. But the only real way to know that is to measure fruit diameters again and run the fruit growth rate model. And if you need, we can also spray one more spray about 7 days from the 10 to 13 millimeter spray. Let's look at how it's gone so far. We had really warm weather during bloom, which brought on rapid bloom, good, excellent bee flight, and very good fruit set all across Western New York. Most varieties bloom very well. There were a couple of places with certain varieties that didn't bloom so well, but mostly we have a very good bloom, very good set, which requires substantial thinning. Those who did blossom thinning, those sprays went on generally under very warm conditions. And there was some effect of it. There always a modest amount of thinning from bloom thinning sprays, and we do them mostly to help induce return bloom, but also to get the process started. At petal fall, the sprays went on under mostly warm conditions if you were inland and you weren't right on the lake. Those warm conditions generally had a decent carbohydrate deficit, and it looks like that spray gave very good thinning. Now, the 10 to 13 millimeter spray, depending on where you are, will probably go on under slightly cooler conditions, but there's the possibility that some sprays next week might go on under relatively warm conditions. And that difference in the forecast right now is a little bit unsettling and makes it difficult for me to make precise recommendations. But if it's going on, later that, tomorrow or Saturday or Sunday, it'll probably be under cool conditions, which will give moderate thinning. We like to time this spray based on degree days that we can calculate, and it's available to you on the carbohydrate model website. And we try to target this window between 200 and 250 degree days. I first want to show some carbohydrate balance data from two locations. An inland site, I've chosen Medina. This was from this morning. The upper chart shows the carbohydrate balance all the way from green tip. The solid horizontal blue line is the 0 mark. And you can see that the carbohydrate balance has been deficit all the way from the beginning. But we had a serious carbohydrate deficit right at bloom during that period of time, which caused bloom to happen very rapidly. but also gave us really nice fruit set. So blossom thinning sprays during that time should have worked fairly well. The deficit moderated a little bit by the time we got to the petal fall window. And for Medina, I put that petal fall window opening around the 18th of May and lasting until the 21st of May. Now that's the case for inland sites. And you can see that if you sprayed in the early part of that window, you had a substantial 7-day deficit. As you got near the end of it, it got more neutral, closer to zero. There were a couple of days, only a couple, since the start of green tip, where we had a positive carbohydrate balance. However, since those days, we've trended more negative. Now, for this area, the inland area, which would be Medina, Geneva, Lyons, the thinning window for the 10 to 13 millimeter spray seems like it's opening now. If you look at the bottom table, which is the same data but in tabular form, it shows that today, May 26th, we're in that 200-degree day range, and we'll be in it today, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and maybe you could say even Sunday. Today, the 26th, it's really warm, and there is a significant daily carbohydrate deficit. But when you pair that with the previous 2 days with positive and then 3 or 4 days out, it looks like it's going to be positive again. It gives a 7-day balance of a mild 7-day balance of minus 8.5. So with that sort of mild balance, even though it's relatively warm today, if you were to spray today, you would put on a full rate. But you would expect good thinning. That's what the green indicates. If we look forward, the cool days of Saturday and Sunday, just Saturday in the 60s and Sunday low 70s, give a positive carbohydrate daily balance. Then as you see Monday and Tuesday, it's forecasted for Medina to be 82 and 84 with nighttime temperatures above 60. These nighttime temperatures above 60 always give more thinning. And you can see that we're looking at some significant deficit from those days. Now, right now, they're predicted to be very sunny. So warm temperatures with sunny weather give only mild deficits. If it's cloudy, then you have serious deficits. But by that time, at inland sites, we'll be at 15 millimeter fruit size. And so the dilemma for inland sites is, do you spray now when we're at the right fruit size time, but weather is cool, especially Saturday? Or do you wait it out and start spraying Monday after the temperatures warm up? When we look at a lake site, and I've chosen for this discussion Williamson in Wayne County, the picture is slightly different. First, in the upper graph, you can see that full bloom happened after the real heat wave had passed. And the petal fall window opened up on May the 21st, in which we were almost no deficit, and it's continued for the last several days with a carbohydrate surplus. I would expect those petal fall thinning sprays that went on from the 21st on to the 24th probably would result in very mild thinning. Now, as we look forward, we won't enter the 10 to 13 millimeter window for another couple of days until Monday. If you look at this bottom chart or the table on the bottom, it shows that we get to the 200-degree days about Monday. And the surprising thing to me that I haven't been able yet to reconcile, and it's probably just the forecasts sometimes are way wrong, it shows instead of 80 degrees on Monday and Tuesday, as is predicted for Medina, it shows only 70 and 71 predicted for Williamson. That is very, very different. If you wait and spray on lake sites until Monday, there will be cool, relatively cool, and almost no deficit to help. And that will give mild thinning. So there's one important lesson to learn here, and that is the forecast from the carbohydrate modeler is only as good as the temperature and sunlight forecast. Thus, it's best to run this model the very day you spray, so you have the most up-to-date information. and not rely on what I'm showing here, what will happen on Monday or Tuesday, because it may change significantly by the time we get to Monday or Tuesday. So I want to then go forward to talk about what it appears to have happened so far in thinning. Number of people are measuring fruitlet diameters, but they've only had the first measurement. And until they take the second measurement, the fruit growth rate model does not give you any prediction. But there are two places, mostly it's Orleans and Niagara County, where I was able to get fruit set data only for Honeycrisp. And it shows that Honeycrisp are still quite heavy in these two orchards. First, let's look at the top chart. These trees were pruned to have around 250 clusters. And when you multiply that by 5, that's about 1,000 fruits per tree. The target was 95. We'll just round it to 100. So it basically is 10%. So far, with a blossom and a petal fall thinning sprays that happened earlier, the fruit number has been reduced from 1,000 to 308 fruits. But 308 fruits is still 3 times the number of final fruits that are needed. Thus, this block will need another significant amount of chemical thinner put on at the best timing in the next few days. The second block is a big concern to me because it was pruned very lightly and it had around 500 flower clusters per tree instead of the recommended 180 to 200. With 500 flower clusters, that was 2,500 fruits per tree, but they still only wanted 125 fruits. With the petal fall spray that worked well, it only reduced the fruit numbers to 900, but 900 is still 7 times the target. And so in this case, because of the excessive number of flower clusters, that it wasn't pruned hard enough, the thinning job is just impossible. There will be no way to get that number down to 125 through chemical thinning, and can probably only be accomplished with hand thinning. But the big sad part is that that number of fruits will completely inhibit flowering next year. There's almost no way out of that box right now. Nevertheless, we deal the hand we've been given, and so in that case, it needs a substantial amount of thinner, probably on the best possible day in the next 5 days. I don't have any data on Gala from fruit growth measurements that people are taking, but just my observations, Gala are set up with very heavy. I have some data from the Albany area that Gala still have 4 times as many fruits as desired, and so that's probably the case here, and we'll need a substantial amount of thinner. Now, over the next several days, people that are measuring fruitlet diameter will get their second measurement in tomorrow or Saturday, and then we'll have that data before we have to decide on a thinner. I thank Mario and Craig for this data. They measured fruit sizes in quite a few different varieties around the Western New York. And I have 3 different scenarios: inland, Orleans and Niagara, inland Wayne, and then Lake Wayne County. For some of the main varieties like Gala, we're 10 millimeters at inland, Fuji 10 to 9, New York 1 9 to 10, Honeycrisp 10 to 12, and 11 even on the lake. So Honeycrisp are quite far along and need some attention soon. New York 2, 11, 10, and 9. Now, as Craig said, Zestar are huge, 14 millimeter average, some are 15 millimeters. A smattering of other varieties were measured inland in Wayne. You can see they generally go from 9 to 10. Johnny Mac was bigger, and Ida Red is bigger. And certainly Matsu or Crispin and Johnny Gold are bigger. I wish we had more data on Evercrisp, but it seems rather small at the moment, but it's a lake site. And Minnieska or Sweet Tango was relatively big. Now, one concern in the one Evercrisp block that Mario looked at, the set was poor. And this has been a problem with that variety. It either sets poorly or it responds very significantly to petal fall thinners. And so we have to be quite careful that we don't over thin that variety. But the fruit sizes say that we are now entering the window for thinning between 10 and 13 millimeters. And that's very consistent with the carbohydrate models, which says we're now in that window. So let me give you some suggestions for thinning. First, the best timing is forecasted to be between yesterday, May 25th, for inland sites. And so yesterday at Geneva, we did some thinning, and today is our main day for thinning at Geneva through Sunday, May 29th. However, for lake sites, the best timing appears to be starting Monday through Thursday. Now that's based on the carbohydrate model, but the fruit diameters that Mario and Craig have measured show that we're probably entering that window sooner than Monday, probably Saturday. Now, unfortunately, tomorrow, Friday, is going to be rainy. There's still some time today to spray for inland sites, and it's beautiful weather and high temperatures. So if you weren't listening to me, you could be out spraying if you were on inland sites. And that's what my crew at Geneva is doing. But if you don't spray today, Friday's rainy, Saturday's very cool, Sunday's not quite so cool, but still on the cool side. It almost seems that you should wait until Monday. Now, that will be relatively large fruit size. I think that many of the averages will be 12, 13 millimeters. But remember, this is a 10 to 13 millimeter window. And so I think you'll still be in the window, but on the outer edge of that window to wait until Monday to spray. For lake sites, the window really doesn't even open till Monday. And so you have Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And hopefully within those 3 days, you'll find a good spray day for thinning. I mentioned that the forecast indicates that inland we're going to have mid-80s Monday and Tuesday, but only 70s along the lake. I don't know if that's true. I don't trust those forecasts. So wait, and if you're going to spray Monday, run the carbohydrate model Monday morning before you start, just to see what it really is predicting. Even with the 80 degrees inland predicted for Monday and Tuesday, the average carbohydrate deficit is only going to be mild, minus 10 grams. It's not going to be huge, minus 40, minus 50, or minus 60. But that deficit will really help give good thinning. But since it's a moderate deficit, it suggests that we use full rates. Now, if those temperatures really materialize for Monday and Tuesday, Maxcel will do a great job. If you're spraying Saturday or Friday with rain and Saturday under only 60 degrees, it's not going to do a great job. So that's another reason to either spray today while there's a window or wait until Monday. Now, it appears with the little data that we had very good thinning from Honeycrisp from the bloom and petal fall sprays, but with relatively high blossom load, since this is the on year for Honeycrisp and you have a lot of clusters on some trees, you're going to need another spray. But this 10 to 13 millimeter spray under really good conditions, if done Monday or Tuesday, will probably be enough. And there will be no need for a rescue spray. Now, I did hear from Mario that one person seems to feel they might have overthinned with just a petal fall spray on Honeycrisp. So that's where it would be super valuable if you could do fruit diameter measurements in your orchard and run the fruit growth rate model just to make sure in your own mind you have as many fruits as you think you have that are still growing. Now, the 2 sets of data that I showed you showed with Honeycrisp there were still 3 times as many fruits as we needed growing, or in the case where the block was not pruned very much, it had 7 times as many. Those blocks definitely need a full dose of NaN7. Now, with Gala, they're set up so heavy that no matter what you do on this spray, it will not give you enough thinning, which will require probably a 4th and final rescue spray the following week when fruits are relatively big. Now, what are your options for thinning at this 10 to 13 millimeter stage? 7 plus oil is an option, and that's very common in Pennsylvania. And when you combine 7 with a very powerful penetrant like oil, it can be a potent thinner. And some people even get 7 and regulate, giving them potent thinning. But the most common approaches that we recommend, which have been the most successful for us in our trials, have been the combination of either NAA and 7 or Maxcel and 7. Now, for a few people that are trying to produce fruit free of carbaryl or 7 for marketing purposes, the combination of Maxcel and NAA with no carbaryl in it has been very successful and has given very similar thinning to either NA and 7 or Maxcel and 7. So let me run through just a few varieties. This is a great year to use Maxcel on Gala. The full dose is 64 ounces on a tree roll volume dilute basis and a pint of carbaryl. Now in the next slide, I'm going to explain what I mean by tree roll volume dilute. For Honeycrisp, we prefer an NAA-based program. With the amount of Honeycrisp from those 2 sites that I just showed you data for, they need a full dose of NAA, which is 3 ounces on a tree roll volume dilute basis and a pint of carbaryl. With Snapdragon, as long as they're older than 4 years old, we've had the best success with Maxcel at the full rate to 64 ounces plus carbaryl. Now, if they're younger than 4, I would back that rate down to only 48 ounces on a tree roll volume dilute basis. For Macintosh, historically, and we continue to recommend this, a moderate dose of NAA of only 2 ounces on a tree roll volume dilute basis plus carbaryl works very well. Empire, however, requires higher rates and has reacted better to Maxcel than to NAA. And so the full dose of Maxcel is appropriate for Empire. With Spur Delicious, if they bloomed well and set well, then this high dose of Maxcel is the preferred option. Now for Fuji and Spur Delicious, because they sometimes have pygmy fruit problems when NAA is used, we suggest not to use NAA on either of those 2. And so with Fuji, with a strong set, even though they're slightly behind, 64 ounces on a tree roll volume dilute basis would be our suggestion. Now I want to review with you the proper, or at least the way I think is proper, way to calculate rates of either NAA or Maxcel so that we can be talking on the same page. The rates that I've given you in the previous slide are based on a tree roll volume dilute basis. Those are the rates per 100. And if you sprayed that orchard at full dilute, it would generally be double that amount because that's the amount per 100. So when you calculate the amount of chemical you want to add to a full sprayer, you have to go through this calculation. I'm going to work through 2 examples with you, the NAA rate, which is the proper rate for Honeycrisp. What we used to call 7.5 parts per million, we now call 3 ounces per 100. The second example is a Maxcel example, what we used to call 100 parts per million Maxcel, which we now call 64 ounces per 100. The first step in the calculation is to measure tree roll volume for the orchard and then calculate from that a concentration factor based on how much water you're actually spraying. The concentration factor is simply the ratio of the measured tree roll volume divided by the volume you're actually spraying. It's pretty simple. Let's suppose a mature tall spindle orchard measures at 200 gallons. And you're only spraying 100 gallons. Therefore, 200 divided by 100 gives you a factor of 2. We use that factor in calculating how much goes in the tank. Let's use a second example. I use this one specifically for Snapdragon. I've yet to see a Snapdragon orchard tall spindle that fully fills the space and measures 200 gallons. They often at maturity are only 150 gallons. And some of the super spindle blocks are only 150 gallons. In this case, if the tree roll volume is 150 gallons, but you're spraying 100, then the concentration factor is 1.5. Now, some of you are not spraying 100 gallons. You're spraying 75 gallons or 60 gallons to the acre. You simply then use that amount to calculate the concentration factor. Let's suppose in the second example, it's a Snapdragon orchard, measures 150 gallons dilute, but you're only spraying 75 gallons, half of that, then you'd have a concentration factor of 2. So it depends both on the tree roll volume of the trees and how many gallons of water you're actually spraying. Once you have that concentration factor, you take my rates and you multiply it by the concentration factor to get the rate per acre. The first example, in the NA example, it's 3 ounces per 100 multiplied by the concentration factor of 2 gives 6 ounces of NAA per acre. Then the last step is how many acres you spray with a tank. In this case, let's say I'm spraying 100 gallons the acre and I have a 500-gallon sprayer. So I'm basically spraying 5 acres per each spray tank. So every acre gets 6 ounces and I'm spraying 5 acres. So in that tank, I've got to put 6 times 5. I got to put 30 ounces of NAA in the spray tank. Let's look at the Maxcel example, 64 ounces, which is half a gallon. But when I multiply by the concentration factor, I get a full gallon, 128 ounces of Maxcel to the acre. Now, if I'm spraying 100 gallons and I have a 500-gallon sprayer, I'm spraying 5 acres. Therefore, I take my 1 gallon per acre times 5. I'm putting 5 gallons of Maxcel in a spray tank. That's the proper way to calculate how much NAA or Maxcel goes in a full sprayer. Now, one last comment. I don't like to use the concentration factor to adjust the amount of carbaryl in the spray tank. And certainly if I'm using regulated, I don't use the concentration factor. The reason for not adjusting carbaryl with a concentration factor is it has limited solubility. And so when you double the amount of 7, instead of the 1 pint per 100, you're putting in 2 pints per 100 because you're only spraying 100 gallons the acre. That second pint doesn't go into solution. It's simply mixed and kept in suspension and sprayed out, and then it's not absorbed into the leaf, but sits on the surface of the leaf and acts as an insecticide. That surface 7 or carbaryl can be re-wetted with heavy dews or light rains, and then you can get more 7 absorbed into the tree and get more thinning. But I don't like that unknown of whether or not we get re-wetting. And I think in some cases it's resulted in some problems of over-thinning where people put in that second pint of carbaryl and then got more thinning than they expected. So I would suggest you simply add 1 pint of carbaryl per 100 gallons of water, no concentration factor, which would mean simply 5 pints to the sprayer. A couple more suggestions. I really want to reemphasize that I would ask you to run the carbohydrate model on the day you spray and use that up-to-date information to adjust the rate that you put in the tank. The carbohydrate model will suggest whether you use this full rate or you reduce it 20% or 15% or you increase it 15 or 30%. It's easy to find the carbohydrate model. You can find it on the NUA website, or you can go to the malusim.org website and you can run it there. I put this second caution out just in case. I don't think it'll happen to us this year, but if you ever get a situation where the 7-day average carbohydrate deficit is minus 60 or less, you'll overthin every time. And so we suggest you don't thin if we're in that situation. And that happens to us when we get in the high 80s with cloudy weather. It's not likely to happen to us this year. Secondly, remember that at this timing is when thinners have their strongest effect, which is good, but that means they're also risky, which is the time you have to be the most careful. Now, my assessment is there's little risk of overthinning this year because the carbohydrate deficit's predicted to be mild. But run the model again Monday and see how strong the deficit is, or even if there is a deficit. Right now, the carbohydrate model indicates there will be a mild carb deficit in the next few days, and it will require, if you spray today, or even if you wait till Monday, a full rate to get effective thinning. I want to restate that after you spray this spray, whether it's today or whether it's Monday, you really need to assess what happened. And the only good way right now to assess what happened is to measure fruitlet diameter. We're proposing, and we proposed last year, that you time your first measurement about 50 days after you spray, and then remeasure at 100 to 120 days after you spray. When you put the data into the malusim.org, and either on a laptop or on your phone, this model is really easy to use. And I encourage you to use that versus the old spreadsheet form method that we used to use, because the Malusim version includes error detections and helps prevent erroneous answers. Just really quick, this is a screenshot that I have from Medina last year showing, I thought was pretty easy, that if you sprayed on in that year, May 25th, when you had 209-degree days, you simply wait until you have 259-degree days to take your first measurement, which would be 4 days later, because it was rather cool. And then we just use this degree day column here to decide when to measure the first time and when to measure the second time. This is my last slide, and I want to summarize my suggestions. First, I know it's a stressful time, and every grower frets how much to put in the tank and when to spray. I think first, though, it's important for you to assess each block and each variety. In Mario's assessment today, he wrote to me in some notes that I didn't include here what seemed to him to be poor fruit set on certain varieties in certain blocks, which is not typical. So it's really important that you know what's out there. I assess whether the king is present, and then I assess if it's substantially larger than the other fruits in the cluster. Then thirdly, I assess how many fruits does the cluster have. If there's 5, there's a serious thinning job. If we're down to 1 or 2, the thinning job is much less. Remember that we normally need only 1 fruit per cluster, or in many cases, only 1 fruit per every other cluster to have the target fruit number. Secondly, you should time your sprays based on this degree day window, which will either be for inland sites starting today through Saturday, Sunday, or for lake sites starting Monday through Wednesday. You need to assess the response of that spray using fruitlet diameter measurements and the fruit growth rate model, because there will still be a window to apply a rescue spray the following week if you know you really need it. And it's probably going to be the case that many gala blocks will need it. Now, if the 80-degree temperatures come on Monday, we might get enough thinning on gala that we could quit. Point number 4. For this spray, I suggest you take the time to re-nozzle the sprayer so that most of the spray is directed to the top half of the tree. We used to say 2/3 of the spray in the top, but 1/3 in the bottom. But studies that I did before I left on leave, and then Pollyanna continued while I was gone for 4 years, showed that we continue to overthin the bottoms if we do the 2/3, 1/3. So we've changed that recommendation now to say that 3/4 of the spray should be directed to the top half of the tree and only 1/4 to the bottom half of the tree. Number 5, surfactants like Regulate are known to increase the response of NAA and carbaryl. Since there's a carbohydrate deficit this year, or predicted, I suggest you not add Regulate to the mix. It just gives an unknown that's hard to predict. If we have to come back with a rescue spray at 18 millimeters, then we'll add some oil to get the response that we need. So with that, I'd like to stop. Thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to discuss your questions and comment a little further.
Thank you, Terence. Anybody has any question they want to ask live, you can unmute yourself.
Terence,
Yeah,
this is Jim Eve. I'm seeing a lot of those clusters where the king may not be the dominant size at the moment. It's healthy, it's good, it seems to be growing, but there might be a side bloom that's a little bit stronger, or a little larger, at least at this point.
Yeah, that's kind of surprising because we had such great weather during bloom and very good bee flight. But this is something we started to see in the Hudson Valley, and then we've also seen it in the Albany area and a little bit in the Champlain. So it's not surprising that you've picked up on it here in Western New York. There seems to have been some event, and I haven't been able to pin it down yet, cold event that damaged slightly some kings in some blocks. In some blocks in Hudson Valley, they were just gone. In others, they seemed weak and they haven't grown as fast as the laterals. So I'm guessing that's what happened here, although I haven't been able to nail down exactly when. It probably was in March sometime. But in terms of thinning now, when the lateral outgrows the king, that lateral then becomes the dominant fruit within the cluster, and that's the one we're going to want to keep. And so we continue to thin as if it were the king with full rates. That will not thin off like a lateral if it has outgrown the king. The king is the one that will hopefully thin off, and certainly the smaller laterals that we're trying to get rid of.
Thank you.
Thanks. We have another one in the chat box. Pizzazz, Evercrisp, and Pink Lady. General recommendations, and are they easier to thin?
I'm not really up to date with Pizzazz because I have no trees at Geneva, and I've never done a single trial on Pizzazz, and I would defer to some of the rest of you that are growing it. But in terms of Evercrisp and Pink Lady is an easy to thin variety, and so we thin it a lot like we do Ida Red with just a couple of parts of NAA and some Carbril, or just a couple of parts of NAA. Evercrisp is an enigma to me. It should be harder to thin, but we've had trouble over thinning it almost every year that we've done trials on it. Some of it is, I think, poor set. And in fact, this year we started running trials with spraying Retain on it to improve fruit set, like we have done in the past with Sweet Tango and Mini Esca, just because I've become so frustrated with Evercrisp always being over thinned. I think it's a combination of poor set and then very strong response to thinners. So our best results so far have been relatively low rates of Maxcel. Now, because Fuji is a parent of this variety, I don't like to use NAA, but I don't like to use a full rate of Maxcel either. So the 48 ounces of Maxcel would be my suggestion for Evercrisp, assuming that the set is there. But I would emphasize, go out and look at these Evercrisp brocks and make sure you've got 3 or 4 fruits in a cluster. It would be super great if you had done some, or could do some fruit measurements today and then again on Monday before you sprayed, to make sure you've got a lot of fruits that are still growing, because my experience is they are thinning down on their own in many cases. Well, not hearing any more questions, I'll just hope that you do well. I hate to hear stories of overthinning. My whole goal is to prevent overthinning, but it's also really discouraging when you don't get very much thinning and you're stuck with a huge crop, and then you end up with just huge problems with no return bloom. And so my hope is, for what you got from today, is that if you're inland or Geneva or south, you would thin today. But otherwise, wait till Monday, run the model again, and likely put on full rates. I think they're required because of the strong set that I'm generally seeing.
Did get one more in the chat box. Measuring more frequently is okay.
Yeah, it is okay, Mark. The problem is that if you measure every day, the errors in measurement start to become as large as the growth that the tree had. But at least 2 days is adequate, because if we're growing a millimeter per day, it's generally a little less, but let's just round it up because it's generally 0.8, 0.9, but let's round it to a millimeter a day. And my measurement error is 0.2 or 0.5 millimeters, then my measurement error is not nearly as big as the fruits have grown, and the results are more consistent. 3 days between them is even better, but you can measure often and you can start to see trends sooner. Now, the reality is that until you get 4 or 5 days between the first and the second measurement, the estimates are probably going to be a little bit high, indicating you have more fruits than what you really do have. And as you get further, 4 to 5 days away from the application or the first measurement, then the estimates of fruit set are more right on.
Well, great. Once again, greatly appreciated, Terence.
You're welcome, and good luck, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. I echo Terence. Good luck out there and have a great afternoon.